But next year will be 20 years that I've been madly in love with you. She loves and she loves life. I've actually never met anyone who has such a passion.
It's shocking news that Keith Urban moved out of their home at the beginning of this summer and has his own place in Nashville. There's also a report that he's seeing another woman.
Keith Urban, the boy from the windswept shores of New Zealand, once gripped a guitar not for fame, but for refuge. It was his shield against fear, his voice when words failed. He wasn't meant to disappear into Nashville's crowded corridors. He was meant to ignite them. With fire forged in pain and a voice trembling with truth, Urban didn't just play country music. He reimagined it. Each riff struck like lightning across the American heartland. Each lyric carried the weight of survival. Until Grammy wins, platinum records, and sold-out arenas bowed to a man who turned his scars into symphonies. Nicole Kidman, born beneath Pacific skies and shaped by Australian grit, was never destined to be a supporting act. She was born to redefine cinema. From a child silenced by a stutter to a woman who vanished into roles with haunting precision, she didn't just perform, she transformed. Her characters bled, her stories breathed, and the Academy at last placed an Oscar in her hands. She didn't act, she transfigured. Her presence carried audiences into worlds so fragile and fierce that silence followed her like reverence in a cathedral. When their paths crossed, it wasn't just a marriage, it was alchemy, music, and cinema. Two fractured souls daring to fuse into something larger than myth. A love story the world believed indestructible. But behind the ovations, shadows crept in. Relapses, silences, griefs too private for cameras. Their sanctuary was tested, their bond strained by storms unseen. And now, at 57, Keith Urban has spoken. After nearly 19 years together, the fairy tale has ended. But why? The truth is shocking. Before we begin, if their journey has ever moved you, let a tribute below as a sign of respect and appreciation. Keith Lionel Urban was born on October 26, 1967, in Whangarei, New Zealand. But destiny offered no calm. At just 2 years old, his family relocated to Caboolture, Queensland, chasing a better life that never came. What followed wasn't comfort, it was chaos. At 9, Keith stood helpless, as his childhood home was consumed by flames. Fire crawled up the walls like living beasts. Photographs curled into smoke. Toys melted into liquid shadows. Every dream he'd ever held turned to ash in a single night. The stench of burning timber hung in the air. The crack of collapsing beams echoed like gunfire. And there he stood, barefoot, breathless, clutching nothing but fear. Neighbors arrived with boxes of secondhand clothes. Strangers whispered mercy into the smoke. Years later, Keith would recall, voice trembling, "All we had left was each other, and the kindness of strangers who reminded me that not all things burn." But the inferno outside was only a reflection of the one within. His father, Robert Bob Urban, was a man of extremes, a passionate lover of country music, and an unpredictable alcoholic. His silence and fury smothered the house like smoke. The same man who placed a guitar in Keith's hands also placed terror in his heart. Affection was absent, tenderness, a stranger, and the words every child longs to hear, "I love you," never came. "I don't remember him ever saying he loved me," Keith confessed years later, each syllable like a wound still bleeding. That absence wasn't sorrow. It was devastation. Home was suffocating. Doors slammed like thunder. Silence weighed heavier than fists. And yet, amid the rubble, a fragile gesture flickered. Bob taped a handwritten sign to the window of his shop. "Guitar teacher wanted for my son." That sign became salvation. It led Keith to Sue McCarthy, the first person to believe in him. At 4, he strummed a ukulele. At 6, he held a guitar not like a toy, but like armor. In a house ruled by volatility, music wasn't a hobby, it was a lifeline. Through adolescence, Keith poured himself into strings and chords, with a desperation the world mistook for discipline. At Tamworth festivals beside Jenny Wilson, he collected accolades like the Golden Guitar. Audiences saw brilliance. They didn't see the fracture beneath. Behind every ovation stood a boy gasping for air, fleeing the silence of home. Nights stretched in smoky pubs, his parents ferrying him from one gig to another. He played stages far too large for a heart still so broken. The applause roared like waves, but it never filled the cavern inside. Later, in a voice heavy with gratitude and grief, Keith would say, "Music saved me. It gave me somewhere to go when home didn't feel like home." Those words weren't performance. They were revelation, carved from agony. His childhood wasn't just hard, it was devastating, lonely, unjust. And yet, from fire and fists, from forgotten hugs and invisible bruises, Keith Urban wasn't shattered. He was forged. He turned silence into sound, wounds into rhythm, pain into poetry. And this is where his story truly begins. Not in the glitter of red carpets, not in the embrace of a Hollywood star, but in the ashes of a boyhood burned too soon. A boy who never heard the words he longed for, yet grew into a man who made the world listen. Every song, every stage, every love he would one day cling to, including the woman who seemed sent to heal him, carried the echo of that barefoot child staring into the flames, discovering that even from ruin, music could be reborn as salvation. If Keith's childhood was forged in fire and fear, Nicole's began in silence. The kind of silence that convinces a child she doesn't belong, and maybe never will. Nicole Mary Kidman entered the world on June 20th, 1967, in the heavy humidity of Honolulu, Hawaii, while her father, Anthony Kidman, pursued a PhD in psychology, and her mother, Janelle Glennie, studied nursing with quiet resolve. Though born on American soil, Nicole's heartbeat grew on Australian ground. Two cultures braided inside her, leaving her wide-eyed in wonder, but also with a gnawing sense of alienation. At just 3 years old, the Kidman family returned to Sydney, where Nicole and her younger sister Antonia were raised in a home that, from the outside, looked like a sanctuary of intellect and compassion. Dinner table conversations overflowed with psychology, philosophy, and care. Her father became a respected academic, her mother an educator and editor. But amid this nurturing world, Nicole carried a storm with no name, only silence. She was painfully shy, her voice strangled by a stutter that choked her words before they could escape. "I remember being terrified of speaking up, as if my voice didn't belong to me," she would confess years later, recalling the hollow loneliness of those early years. A child surrounded by brilliance, yet locked inside an invisible cage where no one could hear her cries. And yet, even in that silence, a doorway cracked open. At just 3 years old, Nicole Kidman discovered ballet. Music and movement flowed through her like a secret language, one that spoke of freedom, of belonging. On stage, she was no longer the shy child with downcast eyes. She was a spirit unbound. In that sacred space, she was seen without speaking, heard without sound. But the world beyond the stage was less kind. Her lanky frame, fiery curls, and porcelain skin made her stand out like a flame in a dark room, a flame others tried to extinguish with cruel laughter. Whispers followed her through school hallways. Mocking glances cut deeper than words. The feeling of being other became her shadow. Yet Nicole did not collapse beneath it. She transformed alienation into strength. From isolation, empathy bloomed. From ridicule, resilience hardened. From that trembling child emerged a woman who turned ridicule into resilience, who transformed being other into being unforgettable. And from that tender, unsteady strength, she stepped into her next chapter, not merely to be seen, but to be heard. What followed was not luck, not fate, but fire. A blazing ascent of fearless roles and uncompromising choices. Characters so raw, they blurred the line between acting and truth, awakening in every audience member the unspoken ache they carried in silence. From a child silenced by a stutter to an icon whose voice would one day shake the world, Nicole Kidman stands as proof that even in the deepest silence, destiny is already writing its loudest song. While Nicole carried silence that once convinced her she didn't belong, Keith Urban carried wounds that burned like fire, scars of fists, flames, and forgotten love that nearly consumed him. As adolescence gave way to ambition, music wasn't his gift, it was his trial. A boy from Caboolture condemned to prove that his guitar was more than an escape from pain. It was a voice strong enough to be heard. Keith Urban's climb from child prodigy to global country icon was never instant, never easy. It was a brutal road carved not by privilege, but by rejection, resilience, and a faith so reckless it bordered on desperation. By the mid-2000s, Keith Urban's success was staggering. Millions of albums sold across the globe, tours that grossed tens of millions, endorsement deals, a signature guitar line that sold out in months, and a fortune climbing toward $75 million. But none of it quieted the ache. None of it erased the fire that had forged him. Every chord he played still carried the weight of fists and flames from his youth. Every lyric echoed with the ache of survival. His rise wasn't a smooth crescendo. It was jagged, torn from valleys of rejection and doubt. Keith Urban's story was never about basking at the top. It was about enduring every storm that tried to bury him and singing louder each time he refused to break. While Keith carved his place with songs born of pain and perseverance, Nicole Kidman was confronting Hollywood's cruelest truth: that brilliance, no matter how undeniable, can still be caged by the stories others choose to tell. Long before the world crowned her an icon, she was already burning on screen, not with spectacle, but with a quiet intensity that unsettled everyone who watched. In BMX Bandits, she was the untamed spark of youth. In Dead Calm, she was a storm hidden in still waters. Nicole didn't plead to be seen, she demanded it. Every glance was a wound, every pause, a blade. Her first collision with fame came in Days of Thunder, 1990, and with it, Tom Cruise. The world devoured their romance, but Nicole whispered to herself, "I will not live in anyone's shadow." And she proved it. In To Die For, 1995, she devoured the screen as Suzanne Stone, ambition so chilling it left critics stunned. The Golden Globe she won wasn't applause. It was a declaration. She was here to reign on her own terms. Then came Eyes Wide Shut, 1999. Kubrick's labyrinth where fiction and reality blurred until it nearly consumed her marriage. By 2001, Nicole no longer needed to prove herself. She commanded it. Through it all, one truth remains. Nicole Kidman hasn't just built a career. She has survived one. It began with a spark in 2005. Keith Urban, the country music star with a voice forged in fire, met Nicole Kidman, the actress who had turned silence into strength. Their connection was instant. Two artists shaped by pain, resilience, and a longing for peace. Within a year, they were married in Sydney, surrounded by family and close friends. For nearly 2 decades, they stood side by side. Through addiction and recovery, through red carpets and quiet nights, through raising 2 daughters and building a life in Nashville. They were the couple the world believed in, proof that love could survive the spotlight. But behind the scenes, time began to stretch thin. Keith's tours took him across continents. Nicole's film projects pulled her into distant worlds. The rhythm that once united them began to drift. Shared moments became rare, conversations quieter, and the silence that once felt like sanctuary began to echo with distance. There was no scandal, no betrayal, just the slow unraveling of a bond that had once felt unbreakable. In early 2025, Keith Urban spoke publicly for the first time. His voice was steady, but heavy. "We've shared a beautiful life together. But sometimes love changes shape. We're parting ways with gratitude and peace." Nicole, ever composed, released a statement of her own. "Keith will always be a part of my heart. We've grown, we've changed, and now we walk forward separately, with respect and love." The world reacted with shock, then sorrow. Fans mourned the end of a love story that had inspired millions, but those closest to them knew this was not the collapse of a fairy tale. It was the quiet conclusion of a chapter written with grace. Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman didn't fall apart. They simply let go. And in that letting go, they reminded us that even the strongest love stories can end, not with bitterness, but with dignity. Their journey was never about perfection. It was about survival, growth, and the courage to choose peace over performance. As they step into new paths, one thing remains: the music, the films, the memories. They still echo. And the love, though changed, still lingers in the silence they once shared. If this story moved you or sparked curiosity, Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the lives of the stars who shaped history. We'll keep bringing you the stories behind the spotlight, the ones you've never heard, but won't forget. And now, we want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.